Hier ist die neue Folge der Ökonomie-Videos.
You know, have you ever thought about what it would be like if we had just one currency for the entire planet? I mean, no more exchange rates, no more fees when you travel. It sounds so simple, almost brilliant, right? But is that idea a dream come true, or would it turn into an economic nightmare? Okay, let's really get into this. And of course, with stuff like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies popping up, a lot of people are asking this very question. Could a digital currency finally be the thing that unites us all financially? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly why this super interesting idea hits some pretty fundamental and pretty massive economic roadblocks. All right, so let's start with the appeal of it all, and then the first big catch. Because while the idea sounds so clean and simple on the surface, for any government, the reality is just incredibly complicated. And here it is, the big one right off the bat. The second a country ditches its own currency, it gives up its independent monetary policy. It can't adjust its own interest rates anymore to speed things up or cool things down at home. It's kind of like a captain just handing over the ship's wheel and saying, "You take it." Now, here's where it gets really interesting. How can one single global policy be a lifeline for one country, but an absolute disaster for another? To get our heads around this, let's walk through a classic thought experiment from the economist Paul Krugman. Okay, so check this out. Imagine the entire world is made up of just two regions. Region 1 is in a nasty recession. It desperately needs low interest rates to get people borrowing and spending again. But at the very same time, Region 2 is in a massive economic boom. It needs high interest rates to stop things from overheating and creating a dangerous bubble. So what does a single world central bank do? And that's the core of it. You see the problem? You literally can't save one region without potentially wrecking the other. A single policy creates this impossible choice. You are completely stuck between a rock and a hard place, and this conflict of interest is right at the heart of the whole issue. Now you might be thinking, well, hold on. What about the Eurozone or the US? They have one currency across many states. And that's totally true. But here's the difference. Places like that have built-in shock absorbers that the world just doesn't have. They've got stuff like federal transfer payments, where money from a state that's doing great can help support one that's struggling. And they have labor migration. People can just pack up and move from a state with no jobs to one that has them. The world has no global government to manage any of that. So it turns out this whole conflict isn't just a practical problem. It's actually baked into the laws of international economics. There's a fundamental rule, and it's often called the impossible trinity. And this idea, this trilemma, is the absolute key to understanding this entire debate. It basically says that when you're managing a currency, there are three really great things that every country wants. But here's the catch. You can only ever have two of them at the same time. And here are those three goals on the menu. Number 1, you want stable, fixed exchange rates with other countries. Easy to do business. Number 2, you want free capital movement, so money and investments can flow across your borders without a hassle. And number 3, you want an independent monetary policy, the power to set your own interest rates to manage your own economy. That's it. That's the choice. Every single nation on Earth has to make this choice. You can have any two of those you want, but you have to give up the third one. There's just no way around it. Okay, so now let's look at how this trilemma actually plays out in the real world, because it forces countries to make these really tough trade-offs that literally shape our global economy every single day. And to get why this is such a huge deal today, you got to understand what really moves currency markets. We tend to think it's about, buying and selling goods, imports and exports. But look at this. That's only about 5% of the action. A mind-blowing 95% of currency trading is driven by massive international investments, capital flying around the globe. That's why controlling those flows is so important. So let's check out how two of the biggest economies deal with this. Take the United States. It chooses to have its own independent policy and free movement of capital. So what does it have to give up? Fixed exchange rates. That's why the value of the dollar is always floating, up and down. Now look at the Eurozone. The countries there chose to have fixed exchange rates with each other, that's the euro, and free capital movement. So what did each country have to give up? The power to set its own monetary policy. And this table just lays it all out so clearly. The Eurozone checks the box for fixed rates and free capital, so it has to say no to independent policy. The US checks the box for free capital and independent policy, so it has to give up fixed rates. And if you look back at China, for a long time it chose fixed rates and an independent policy, which meant it had to restrict the free movement of capital. You see,
You always have to sacrifice one.
And all of this brings us right back full circle to where we started, to our question about a global currency, whether it's Bitcoin or anything else. Because now we can see the final verdict, looking at it through the lens of this impossible trinity. A single world currency is, by its very definition, the ultimate system of fixed exchange rates, right? They're all fixed 1-to-1. And in our global world, you're obviously going to have free movement of capital. So which two boxes does a world currency tick? Fixed exchange rates and free capital movement. Which box does that leave unchecked for every single country on the planet? Independent monetary policy.
That's the number of tools a country would have left to fight a recession or manage its own economy on its own. 0. Zilch. Every nation would have to accept a single, one-size-fits-all interest rate, no matter what was happening in its own backyard.
And here's why that is such a massive, massive deal. When your country is staring down a recession and unemployment is skyrocketing, what's your number one weapon? You lower interest rates to get things moving again. A world currency would take that weapon away from every country forever. Politically, socially, that's a price that's just almost impossible for any nation to pay.
So, in the end, the question isn't just about economics. It's really a political question. A world currency might sound super efficient, but making it a reality would mean every country has to give up a fundamental piece of its own economic control. And that leaves us with one last really big question to think about.